Yeah.
You ready? You got your first question?
Yeah. No problem.
So,
I don't look in the camera, right?
yeah.
I rather look at you. Right, yeah. Never in the camera.
Better looking at Aki's, yeah. Which is. So we can start anytime. I mean, just relax and talk.
Yeah, I'm ready.
So you can start. How you started?
Oh, so the question won't be on tape.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's start with coffee. Oh, Vespasian and Ala used to say, commençons par le commencement. Is it taping?
Important event in my life was really when I was age of 12, when I decided to make there was a birthday, and my father asked me what to buy for the birthday, and I wanted to have the oil painting. I told you that? I said, you're lying. Really not. I want to have the oil painting. And so he knew his friend, who was one of the partisans, who went to Paris and become abstract painter and formalist in that time. And he just was on vacation back from Yugoslavia and he wanted to have him to advise what to buy because he didn't know anything about oil paint. So we went together in the shop and he bought boxes and boxes of all kinds of stuff and we brought to the house. And they gave me for my birthday present one room that's going to be my studio. So this man gave me the first lesson of the painting. So he didn't put the canvas on the kind of frame. He just cut it very irregular, it's just a piece of square, put on the floor. And he opened one can and poured the liquid glue over the canvas. And then he threw some pebbles and sand. And then he threw the yellow pigment and black pigment and some red pigment. And then linen oil and some plaster, bitumen, and he poured all this gasoline, take the match and throw on the canvas and everything exploded in the front of my eyes. And he looked at me and he said, sunset. So, and he left. This was my first lesson. And it was so incredibly strong in my head, this image. And I as a kid, I was just like standing in front of the sunset for a long time. And then I wait till all things dry for weeks, and finally, when it's dry, very carefully, I put on the wall and I put with 4 nails, and I look for a long time. And then I went with holidays to with my family, and we was 1 month away. When we come back, the sun was really hitting straight into this sunset painting. So when I come back, it was just a pile of dirt lying on the floor. Everything glue was how you call it, from the warmth, the sun melted and there just was nothing there. And this was the really important moment in my life, that I really understand that for me, the process was more important than final result. So that's the very important lesson I learned.
I guess I was involved as a young person. I was working on the docks, and I guess my real involvement with art came about in trying to understand what was going on. I was studying a lot, and I guess the Museum of Modern Art became a place where I began to go. And it's a joke, but it turns out it's quite true. There were nicer girls there. And I was about 14, 15. And it was the first time I'd found places where you could go when you weren't working, where you could talk about the things you were reading and the things you were interested in with the girl that you were trying to take home and sleep with. And I began to look at things, and I discovered Mondrian and I discovered Pollock, and that began to make sense to me, and I began to understand about this idea of a worldview. And so about 14, 15, just about when I was graduating from high school, 15 and a half, I made a decision I would be an artist.
in fact, it was a very bad and good situation. I always thought that it was bad because it was impossible almost to do anything. And for that reason, it was a good situation. Because I think it makes some people, maybe not enough, but some people very, very aware of what is a bad situation, aware of what is a situation with no market, what is a situation with no museum, at that time was none. What can you do in this kind of art world, supposedly still very famous and which has had a fabulous past, and which, as an existing space, was, let's say, in the early 60s, totally zero. And so in front of that situation, either you were fighting and trying to make your little hole, or you were maybe, which was my case, trying to see what and why such a situation happened with the tradition, with the culture, what means such the thing, even knowing that the war was just finished, and that certainly break a lot of things. And then what I think was good in that bad situation was the fact that, especially at the age where you get into, which was like when I was 22 or 23 years old, then you just want to break the full situation because something has to really change. It's not comfortable. You don't find any place for yourself. In the same time, you are in a center. So in fact, it was certainly a good start or a strong start because it was nowhere to get any illusion. I think if I was born at the same time and working in New York, I will have had the feeling that everything was possible. And then maybe I will have been a little more soft in a new kind of environment. And my environment in Paris put me absolutely against everything. Because I found strictly nothing I was able to relate or to be comfortable or to go in that way or etc. etc. So it's why I always thought of that like when I was at that time in the middle of that I was not very happy and it was very difficult. But I realized soon after that it was maybe a chance because it made a lot of obligation to think about the function of the system, the function of the the idea, what I call the ideology of art, which has nothing to do with the ideology of the society.
And then I got a job in the theatre immediately, in the local theatre near where I live, as an assistant stage manager, which sounds very grand, but basically it's cleaning out the toilets, and doing the prompts, and all this kind of thing. Yeah. And it was quite a good repertoire that they were doing. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't an old coward, but I don't know. I worked there for 9 months. And it just really wasn't. Somehow, some kind of crisis came out of me. It wasn't really my life. Maybe it was that I was kind of. My eyes were up there, and my body was down there, and my mind was. And I just absolutely hated it. I got out, and then I had to decide what to do. So, worked in a supermarket, and then got offered a place at university to read history. And there, reading history, within a year, I started organizing art exhibitions. And the reason for this is really quite complicated, because I was always fascinated of how art or culture anticipated what was actually happening. That you never could actually put your finger on what it was, but always the zeitgeist was ahead of events, and that the way how culture moved was always anticipated by artists. And there was this kind of intelligence which artists had. And as I was interested in very extreme areas of activity, as you can see from the whole theatrical thing.
The kind of art that I like and regard as, for me, good art is the art which is like a canary which is taken to the bottom of a coal mine. And you know, when coal miners work, there's lots of gas, methane gas. And they have the canary, and if there's gas around, the canary stops singing and then it dies. And for me, good art is the art which functions in society like that. Because when the society goes wrong, it's the good art, to me, that always dies. Thank you.
It's very beautiful, that last sentence.
At the moment, Germany is changing very much. That means that at the moment, for example, the Cologne Art Association is run by an optician, and there are some people in the art field that are really kind of like coming from other fields, and if you see like people like Caspar Koenig and also like Hans-Ulrich Obrist, they are also good examples for non-art historians or the classic career people who are, I don't want to compare myself with them, but just I think what they do is quite extraordinary, and perhaps sometimes it's very good not to come out of this very straight art school way. I'm teaching in art schools now for 2 years, and it's a very nice experience because I never was in an art school. It's perfect.
Yeah.
And for me, it's a curator. Function of a curator is not so much finding answers. It's more questions, and it's more putting questions together, putting artworks together. And so working with artists like Dan Graham and Katharina Sieverding, Joseph Cassous and other people was quite a teaching experience for me. That means that working very close with them is a very rich, very good experience, as you will know, working with the other artists. And I hope it makes it somewhat rewarding for the artist to work with somebody who is not out of this.
I also think that this whole notion of the curator has to be put into question. And I think that many times it rather needs a facilitator or somebody to, a junction maker, a catalyst, who needs, who helps things getting organized. But it doesn't need. I really don't believe in this, creative curator, which was sort of booming in the 80s. I don't believe in that. I think the curator, in the ideal case, is a catalyst, a facilitator. A producer also, maybe, like in music, a producer sometimes as a catalyst accelerate a little bit that things happen, but a curator is not, inventing fancy exhibitions. And the worst case scenario, it's this curating which is like a stage, where the curator, invents a stage and then has basically a different kinds of work of art which illustrate his, great ideas. I think the curator's ideas are not very interesting. The curator, the curator helps the artist. That's it, and is in a dialogue with the artist. In the ideal case, as Félix Fénéon, French critic, curator, and journalist and gallerist in the 19th, early 20th century, said, Félix Fénéon always said, the art communicator, the curator, is a pedestrian bridge. And I think that this is a main, function the curator has, is to be a pedestrian bridge between the public and the artists, and also to maintain this dialogue. So to maintain a dialogue, on different sides. So I was with Artist Run Spaces before my small excursus, but I'd like to continue this excursus a little bit. And I really think that this, catalyst notion is very important. And there have been in Europe different, examples for that earlier in this century. Same thing is true for another personage who has always been, very influential for my thinking about organizing and making things happen, who is Harry Graf Kessler. Harry Graf Kessler also created this, in-between situations between design, art, architecture. by bringing people into a dialogue, as Ballard says, by being a junction maker. And I really see myself in this sense. I try to be a junction maker more and more, bring people from different contexts together, and not just function in a specialized art context and fill their structures, because I think it is very, very important at the end of this millennium that the different disciplines come again in a dialogue, and that's something which lots of artists at the moment feel like doing. It's not just working in an isolated art world, but again, creating teams, maybe hybrid research team constituted by some scientists and some artists who work on the same thing, which anyway leads us to another, central notions of the 90s, which is the whole notion of the collaborative issues. Lots of artists actually seek collaborative situations where they it goes away from this idea of the one genius, but where fluid sort of team situations, changing team situations, improvised team situations are basically at the origin of works, of processes being realized.
We had a long discussion yesterday about what it was which was special about the CCA.
And basically the answer to that was the fact that it was possible to have an open structure. And that was what was special within the context of the situation here, where there's quite a lot of very formalistic ways of getting an art education and of showing art. And I think that the idea of an open discussion is like a rhyme or metaphor for that open structure.
CCA まさしくオープンコードである。そしてヒエラルキーがないということですね。それはその一部としてここを卒業したからって何の保証もならない。アーティストとして何かアドバンテージが得られるか、そんな保証はどこにもない。それからキュレートラリーコースを取ったらどっかの美術館に就職できるか、そんな保証はどこにもない。でじゃあそんなところには行かないでおこうと思う人は逆にここでご自分の判断で、来ないというそういう判断ができる。でそれからパネルの人たちですけれども、みんなが一致しているのは自分たちがいろいろ経験してそしていろいろ考えたことをそれを知りたいという人に生のデータとして渡してあげよう、素材として渡してあげよう、それを解釈して新しいものを作り上げていくのが来てくれる人たちの、それこそ能力の問題で意思の問題であると思います。で北九州で我々が考えているのは何か現代美術の本当とは何かとか歴史的にこれが正しいんだということを誰も決して教えようとは思ってない。自分はこう考えた、こう考えてこういうふうに行動してきたと、それを正確に伝えたい、それをどんな間にデバイスがなくて直接来てくれた生徒に伝えたい。でそこで自分から考えて何か始める、そういう人が一緒にいてくれたらこんな幸せなことはないと、多分みんなこのような単純な動機でこれに参加しているのではないと思っております。
How developed? God, I have all these different periods. You really wanted to know this? What is the first period? The first period, it was like I just painted dreams. This was when I really started painting with this oil painting. This was just my own dreams. I was thinking the dreams was given to me, so I should not paint them.
I think the only hope at this point to comprehend the kind of life that we're leading is to essentially understand art in its relation to the society. Art becomes now the last point. You don't need a certificate to be an artist. You don't need a license. Nobody can come along and say, you are thrown out of the Academy of Artists. That just means you're not a teacher anymore. Doesn't mean you're not an artist. The artist is the person who will question the relationships of this object to that object to such an extent that if they can find another relationship, if they can step apart and step aside from the metaphors that we're living with, they can present that, and it becomes a method for other people to make their own metaphor, to live their own life, not dependent upon history. And that's the idea of dream time and real time. I realized this when you looked at the equivocation of dream time and digital time space. Digital time space is dream time, because every single thing is an assumption. You have to believe in the assumption before you can believe in the time space. And that's a dream. But art is not about dream. Art is about real time. Art is about the immediate central perception and the immediate central dislocation, displacement. When you look at a configuration, that could be a painting, a drawing, a video, it doesn't matter. It's a relationship. And if that relationship does not depend upon history, it depends only upon itself for you to be able to understand it and use it, it's probably art.
Such extreme zoom that. Oh, yes. Lawrence. God. It's exciting. I want this part of the film to show private tomorrow night.
Better than Sharon Stone.
Listen, this is amazing. You know, here mouse, it's amazing. If you really go inside. Can we go more into egg scene? Oh God. Yeah. Give it to me.
And then after dream paintings, I went to totally something else. I started painting the truck accidents. And Yugoslavia have these very big socialistic trucks that look like a person's, with a strange nose is coming out. And they're green and really it's funny looking. So I will always find out where is the truck accident, and I would like to go to police station and ask police if they can bring me to this place, and then see the truck accident, make a drawing or make the photograph, go back home and paint these trucks crashing together. And most of the time they have big problems because they've always called my father and said, you know, daughter is again in police station looking for the truck accidents, we get to get her home. So, you know, I didn't have much success. But then, after this period of truck accidents, I start actually stealing from the children's shops, the small trucks, like really tiny little trucks. And I would bring them to highways and put them on the highway and watch if the big truck will go and smash this little child truck. But always happen opposite. Actually, the big truck will go and, after he passed, the little truck will be completely perfect, you know, never will be smashed. So I start painting these strange paintings, quite big, enormous. So I always have to be kind of physically involved in this. Where actually there was a big car, the truck accident between child truck and the big truck. And the big truck would be totally smashed and child truck would be completely untouched. So it was the one period. And then from there I start getting into clouds. And there was a huge period of bodies and the clouds.
She's beautiful. Because I don't know what he's doing with the camera, but I love this close-up stuff.
We are experiencing, obviously, a globalization, not only of economy, but especially also of the art world. Now you can say art has always been global, because we've always been traveling, and visual art speaks its own language and is crossing borders anyhow. Yeah. I think it has to be part of the attitude that you are really thinking in global terms, without forgetting that you have to select. Because we cannot say that everything we know. I do not know anything about Japanese art. So if I invite a Japanese artist like I've done, it was through an artist who had invited this artist, who knew. So I think that you have to be very careful if you think about globalization of the art world. Yeah. And you must not think and pretend that everything is equally interesting. It is not. You still have to make your selection. And I particularly think that those artists that travel a lot and that live really for a long time in different countries, they are the best informers and maybe also artists that really make an art of today. Because they are making their own coherent body of work without being stylistically, locked up in a framework which only functions in their own history of art, in their modernism, in their nationalism. I think that people who are borderline artists, who cross borders, who are transcultural as a mentality, still have a necessity to stick to their own vocabulary. They have to make their personal way, but they will still have a much more open attitude and a flexible mentality. I believe in that very strongly.
Third possibility or option of organizing exhibitions which I try to explore, which are the mobile exhibition, which are no more linked to a very specific site or place. But as I said before, the Museum of Contemporary Art definitely is a valid option, and I'm not at all trying to leave the museum. But beyond that, the third point, it's not just to make a contemporary art show about pieces, but to have a more broader exhibition. And I think that's also something at the moment which is very crucial. To have broader situations, multiple platforms. So we have in the exhibition on the one hand individual pieces, individual installations by individual artists, but we have also the collective spaces, the phenomenon of the artist-run spaces, the spaces which the artists create themselves or run themselves to have their own platforms. And I think that this is something which is very crucial again, and not only in England, I see it all over the world, which is very crucial for the 1990s. This idea that artists do again their own structures of production, distribution, information, that artists do not just wait until a gallery or a museum knocks against their door and invites them to participate in a show, but that they take their things into their own hands. They do it. They do it themselves and create mobile, flexible structures which define their own necessities.
That when I was a child, that's kind of what I was good at when I was a child. So when I went to school, that was the only kind of option. I'm one of these people who was always in the art room at school. So when it came to history or geography, where people would say, well, these are interesting subjects, I could never understand history or geography in the same way I could never understand mathematics or physics. So I feel my childhood is just like a sort of continuity really into the age I am now. I mean, I can feel a sort of sense of childlikeness now. So I don't feel that there was any gap. I didn't have an idea today I'm going to be an artist. It just kind of went straight on through. Only this thin pane of glass separates me from the world outside. The way to the mountains starts here. Reaching the summit is only half the journey. Midnight sun, rocks falling onto a frozen lake, one stone thrown into a pond, full moon, the light of day and the darkness of night, storm prediction, changing shape of the brain, outdoors, indoors, the outdoor life, homelessness, a blank space on the map, slow time, fast time, blossom time, momentum, footprints of the ancestors, the guidebook to a location of the mind, sun road, melting snow, grinding corn, destination forwards, backwards memory, placing one foot in front of the other, rhythm, instincts not ideas, the magnetic way, ideas not instincts, evaporation, lenticular cloud, banner cloud, heads or tails, lost in thought, breathing through clothes, heartbeat, sound of flying swans, the healing powers of walking, too much walking scars the earth, tracks on dew-covered grass, balanced 4, unbalanced 7.
The main point that people seems to forget and explain a lot of things is the fact that the idea of modern art or contemporary art as it is today, even in any place now in the world. This idea or this invention is absolutely European, totally due to European way of thinking. At the minimum, I think 25 years, a quarter of a century, it's the fact that this idea seems to be more than European, seems to interest, for reason I cannot explain because that's really not my possibility, but seems to interest as well people from South Africa as the Eastern world, etc., etc. And this interest seems to grow and producing new type, a new way of thinking of artists. And of course, if that continue to develop after a kind of obligatory marshmallow mixture, etc., where the tradition which invites that will be maybe either powerful or at least like a big light, I mean, like something people refer, will maybe little by little dilute in something much bigger, where this thing will maybe vanish as an original point of departure.
Do you want me to talk about Magicien de la Terre now? Well, Magicien de la Terre, I conceived the show. I mean, the idea came in the early 80s. The idea was, for the first time, to consider the word international for a contemporary art exhibition as serious. And to say, well, international is not only the West and a few industrial countries and sometimes a little bit of South America. It's more than that. Well, what a major event, to give you some clue, which brought me to this idea actually, was when I went in 1982 to the Biennale of Sydney. In the Biennale, a few Aboriginal Australians had been invited to make a piece, which was actually a religious piece. They made a ritual in the museum, in the New South Wales Art Gallery, and they then made on the ground, on the earth, which was brought in the gallery, they made a painting. And there was a whole discussion among us and between me and the artist whether this was permitted or not. You know, was this right or not? Was a curator actually allowed to introduce a religious work of art, in a way, or magical or whatever, which has nothing to do with the concept of Western art? Is he allowed to introduce that in a contemporary art show and mix that in a way with what we know in the West as contemporary art? And I felt that the discussion was so hard, you know, between us. There was somewhere for, some against, and so on, and all that, that I thought that there was a sort of taboo, actually, about that. I mean, and I thought, well, there had been already a lot of discussions which I was aware of about, you know, the introduction of non-Western art or art of the third world in the context of the Western museums. But that had been talks generally. It was abstract. It was always about theory of art. And actually, I thought nobody ever tried. And we are, as curators, practitioners. We're not art critics. We are not basically art theoreticians. And I thought that if there was a taboo and if the discussion was going on but only in written form, at a certain point somebody had to try it. And so I decided to make this show. something which is very often not understood is that modernity in Europe and in North America has been so much influenced by other cultures, styles and forms and shapes. All these discoveries of this non-Western art through the 20th century has had such an enormous influence that actually we are playing on several layers of different aesthetical systems. We are not anymore in, there seems to be among people who talk about art theory a sort of enormous nostalgia of the 19th century and what was before in the West, you know, when there was a real rule and a canon and you knew what was art and what wasn't, you know. But since then, modernity has played and has been so much influenced by all these different styles that now it's very difficult not to integrate that. Actually, these aesthetical principles have been more or less integrated in some parts of modernity. And so we play on very different levels, and it's not anymore one rule or one system.
やはり一番気になり続けていることっていうのは多分多くのアーティスト全部じゃないです。それから多くの観客も鑑賞者たちもそれから美術に興味を持っている人たちもあまりにこう依存的になっているのではないかというポストモダンの論議を通して価値が全てこう相対的だと言われるしなるほどそうかもしれないでも一番僕大事だと思うのは果たして本当にそうなんだろうかと自分でこう検証していく態度だと思うんですよ。でそれはその美術館員に求められるしそれから見る人にもそれからものを作り出すアーティストも考えてみる今こう言われている常識与えられた条件というのが本当に言われている通りのものなのかというまずそういう疑問をこう一つずつこう自分で確かめていくそういうプロセスがどの部分にもいるのではないかという気がします。
Make a distinction between information and knowledge, because I think a lot of information is like white noise. It's almost like nothing. If I can kick Lawrence Weiner on the leg, I'll be giving him information, and he'll be receiving that information on a number of levels. One is I've gone crazy. Second, his leg will be telling him that it hurts. Third, it will be information he wants to move to the other end of the room. So there's lots of other kinds of information, but knowledge is information crystallized through some kind of system or ideology. And I think we have to be very precise of whether we're talking about knowledge or whether we're talking about information.
Or aesthetic experience, because it can also be confused that maybe somebody wants to transmit something which is a work in itself, via text or whatever, which he intends to be art and not knowledge.
I'm only halfway done. Do we have some more time? Yeah. I think at the moment where informations are completely exploding and you can have informations about thousands of artists on the websites and where you have more art magazines than ever, that doesn't mean that the people know more. And sometimes maybe rather the opposite. And I think that art, still has to do with exchange. It has to do with exchange and with dialogue. As Douglas Gordon recently said, the object only makes sense if it triggers a dialogue. And I think this triggering of the dialogue is something which is quite significant for 1990s art. The whole relational issue, the art or the object makes only sense if it triggers a relationship, an in-between space between people. And I mean, that's also why we still, need centers. Why this is bullshit to think that we can go to a village and we have our laptop and we have our website and we are, globally connected and we live in a village. For art, it's still necessary to have centers where meetings take place, where exchange take place.
And this was going on and on and on till the one point I started painting just empty sky. And the canvases became more and more empty and become just like a plain. And while I was studying this empty sky, I was very interested in this kind of ozone layers. I was thinking that Van Gogh actually saw these particles of the air when he painted around his trees, these kind of air molecules and stuff, things like that. I think that he was in the kind of state of mind that he saw this, and I was really trying to see these molecules of the air, like to paint ether, And then in one point, I was looking at the sky and something like 15 military planes passed by. And they made this fantastic drawing, when you can see the drawing forming and, and staying in the sky for a little while and then disappearing again. And then that was the crucial moment. I said, why I should paint anyway? It's so stupid. It's like, two-dimensional, and why I can't use the real material, real water, real sky, real fire and so on. And then I went to the military base and asked if they can borrow me 15 military planes to make some drawings, and I brought some design for that. They called my father again and said, get her out, how much cost 15 aeroplanes to fly just to make you drawings. So I could not do this. But from that point on, I started really get interested in doing things more like projects and involving the sound. So I've done lots of sound how you call that, projects, till the point then I really get into the performance. Okay, we're going to make a little introduction. Hi. This is official tatami house. Norbu didn't organize this, but we have to sit for 3 hours and waiting for the dance. They are the people. There is a French, Jean-Hubert Martin, known for Magicien de la Terre. Next to him is the future director of the museum in cold country Stockholm. There is a man from Kunstwerk, and just behind him is the man with the handbag run, Ulrich, who doesn't sleep.
Then it's an interesting idea, and I think that the body of work I've been trying to do now, which is about here and now and then, that's the piece that I'm showing. This is the first time I'm showing that in Tokyo. I started to show in Amsterdam a piece in a group show about the idea of past, present, and future. That the past and the future are exactly the same. Because in fact, we're just imagining that we remember, or we're imagining what it's going to be. Present is not an imagination, the present is reality. And I'm trying to make art that functions in its own reality, so that when it passes from one generation to the next, each generation comes with their own needs and desires. The work has no metaphor.
If I'm happy to be a curator, yes, very much. Yes, certainly. What I'm really interested is to break this old separation, which is so typically Western, so rooted in our old rationalism of this split, between the rational aspect of it, the ethnology and so on, and the feelings and the sensitivity and the artistic aspect. And what I really would like and wish is to have actually scientists or researchers, scholars working with artists.
Edge of the mountain, edge of the ocean, the migration of geese, the migration of butterflies, a line of ants, magic map. A worm crosses the road, counting fingers and thumbs, walking 10 toes, beads, paces, walking backwards in mud, upstream, downstream, where dusk meets dawn, twigs of the Arctic willow, the flame, a scattering of raindrops on flat, dry rock, the shadow of unseen heat waves, cool air from the waterfall, particles of dust floating in a shaft of sunlight, spider tracks across cold campfire ash, a mouse calling in the wind.
啓蒙という状態は啓蒙する方もされる方もある思考の停止状態だと思うんですよね。で啓蒙してもらわないからわからないというそういう依存状態が生まれてくる。で私が望むのは本当に単純なことなんですよ。自分で考えてほしいという。自分で考えろと。あなたもね啓蒙してもらうんじゃなくて先ほどの人は図書館に行って資料を調べたと。それでビュランしかなかったと。でもこれはすごい素晴らしいジャンプだと思うんですよ。でここね会場に全員の資料がないからこれは何だというクレームするのと全然質が違うと思う。自分で図書館まで調べようとされたというなんか何か考えようとされたそういう人が世の中全てになったら絶対いろんなシステムが変わってくると。だからその美術館が啓蒙するという危険性はですね思考を固定したものを垂れ流しにしてしまう。つまり解釈の余地を与えない。先ほどインビトゥインでの話とも関係すると思うんですが決まりきった解釈を押し付けるつまり押し付けられることで満足する状態とこういうものは絶対もうやめなければいけないというのが先ほど私が言いたかったことなんです。だから我々も考えるしそれからみんなやっぱり自分で考えろと考えなきゃもうダメなんじゃないでしょうかといつまでも自動的な状態にいててパッケージを消費してるだけではダメなんではないでしょうかとサスキアなんかの言うエンターテインメントの美術とエンターテインメントの話もこれに全部かかってくるような気がします。
When I was a little younger, every
Well, you are young. Yeah.
I said when I was a little younger.
Yeah.
Very carefully. I said that I thought that every journey was quite a change. Like you travel somewhere and you're convinced after this journey will be somebody different. So if a show is successful or not, I would describe in this way. If I'm somebody different later, then it was a successful show for me. So I have a very weird relationship about evaluating something positive or negative. I can say my stomach had a good feeling or has a bad feeling. But as soon as the show really had an impact on me, I think it was successful. And the funny thing is that since I'm very fetishist in certain media things and in certain TV and pop cultural events, and so if, like for example, art videos or shows are boring, I have this immediate kind of I'm getting very nervous in a way. So I'm not saying that shows have to be entertaining. I'm not saying this because working with art is not kind of like watching TV, that's a different thing.
I've mentioned interactivity at different occasions. Another main key issues, of the 90s, which goes a little bit through all these different exhibitions I'm mentioning. And I think interactivity, why interactivity in the 1990s? It probably has seldomly been more talked about interactivity, in broader media fields than in the 90s. Why at the moment when in multimedia, intermedia, people talk more about interactivity than ever before, computer games, interactive TV. Why at such a point in more and more artists work with interactivity? I think it has a lot to do with the fact that most of the interactivity is industrialized. So as to say, the whole computer game interactivity is a pseudo-interactivity. The person who plays the game is basically only invited to play the game within the rules which have defined by the industry who produces and distributes interactivity. It's a little bit the same thing about interactivity on websites. I mean, most of the websites, the interactivity so far doesn't go beyond ordering a pizza. And that doesn't mean that this is not a potential. I believe very much in interactive websites, and lots of artists start to develop interactive websites, and which are actually very artist-run, which are invented by themselves. It is very important that most different artists define a very open interactivity. It is the artwork trigger is a trigger, and basically the viewer or the user, one can also say the user, basically has to find out himself or herself what the thing is for, or what basically he or she can do with it, how he or she can interact with it. So many times the user manual or the instructions, are not really pre-given. And if they are pre-given, they are very open. Even if I think of Franz West's interactive settings where you are invited to participate, but the rules are not completely clear, so you have to find out yourself the rules. And I really think that at the moment where there is so much passive interactivity, it's a very strong presentiment of artists to work on an interactivity which is active, which makes the viewer an active part of the game. And I think it's a presentiment of many artists at the time where more and more interactivity risks to be industrialized.
I think that the artists in our generation, especially right now, really give a depth, gives a profoundness to dealing with media. If I talk about Stan Douglas or Douglas Gordon or Pippi Lottirist, for example, I think they are so important artists for me as far as their view on media, the identification with media and the participating with media, and not on an illustrating level, but on a very, and that is something I also talked with Saskia 2 sentences about, was I would call this on a not illustrating but a more abstract level. It's not abstract, but it's more abstract than lots of artists working directly with the medium, and for me being too much on a illustrating level. A visual artist, so you could ask me what does it mean to be a visual artist? It's a very big question. It needs 2 hours to be talked about. Yeah. But to cut the matter short, I'm mostly working with artists that are interested in the in-between spaces and the boundaries and the experiment of how far they can go. It's sometimes the case that I see a painting or I visit somebody who is painting and I really question myself whether this was art, what I was seeing. It's really losing a little bit this close and precise boundaries.
I do not project the change because you cannot project how things are going. You can only be very attentive about what's happening with media, with information, with the mediatization of culture. Of course, we are trying to find a position there. I still believe in the authentic experience. And if I use internet or media or video as an art form, I want to have it in the building and not as a tape that I send via Federal Express somewhere and say, you just view it. Then it is a demonstration tape. A video artist, a filmmaker, they all need also that moment, that time and space, which the work requires. And that delivers an authentic experience for the viewer, even if it is a media work. So I think there's a lot of work to do still. Even if you use internet, I think much more as a PR medium, as an advertising medium, as a communication medium. It's fine. It's a fax, it's a telephone, it's a television, it's everything. But still, I believe in the authentic experience for people to come in that space and experience the show. This is why I am not so very good at, you wanted to know what I'm not good at making shows that travel, because I do not believe in the pre-packaged thing. I believe in the on-site, in the work which allows an artist to create something relevant to that situation. Thank you.
We're sitting here with a brand new Sony camera, which is fascinating me, and we're talking. Business people would tell you were silly. There's no such thing as a specifically Japanese camera. or a specifically German camera, or a specifically this. It's silly. There are people that are formed that bring a certain kind of a knowledge from their own background into the making of art, but it's like medicine. There is no difference between an injection, acupuncture, or faith healing if it works. And art is something that has to work, and it will work any place. As what it is, it may not have the same name, it may not have the same material value, but it will work any place, or else it's not art.
Yeah, that leads us basically to the fifth platform. And the fifth platform are research projects, are interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary projects which are not necessarily exhibitions. And I really think that within this explosion of exhibition, it's very important that there are projects also which are like laboratories, which are research projects, and where artists basically can make research, where meetings take place, and where not necessarily results have to happen. I always try to organize, besides panel and conferences, events which are like endless coffee breaks, because many times the most important thing doesn't happen during the conference, it happens in the coffee break. So I find it interesting, to sort of have an event which is only the coffee break. You don't have the conference, you just have the coffee break. And that's why I think that the structure you are working on, the CCA Kitakyushu, is a very interesting model, because it is not just an exhibition space, but it is also a space of production, of reflection, of research, of dialogue, a very hybrid place. And I think such a structure, which matters in the 90s, must be hybrid. I think it must be hybrid in many ways. It's not only to be hybrid in terms of its functioning, but it's also hybrid in terms of its use. I really think that it's very important that in one structure you have many different things, and that there is a crossover between these different activities which take place in one building, that maybe people who didn't even think about it through the back door all of a sudden see a contemporary art exhibitions, and vice versa. The people through the back door all of a sudden are in the people all of a sudden through the back door are in a scientific laboratory. And I think that this is one of the main points. It is really to have a much more complex structure. Any questions?